Okay. Welcome back to Connect the Dots podcast. I'm Vicki O'Neill, your host, and I have a guest today, Kendra Ramirez, and I wanted to welcome her to the podcast. Today we are going to be talking about the psychology of marketing and sales. And Kendra and I have known each other for ever. Not forever. We've known
in marketing terms, it is forever.
It is forever because we met actually at the onset of like when LinkedIn and Twitter were just kind of taking off. That was before Facebook. That was before Instagram. So we've known each other about 9 or 10 years. We can't really pinpoint when it actually was that we met, but we think we met through JC.
Yeah.
And so we've stayed in contact. We've both worked at companies. We've done our own businesses. We were in a mastermind together, and we've just stayed in contact. And I thought she would be a great person to have on this podcast because her and I both have experience in marketing and sales, and she's got great perspective, great insight, very intelligent. And so I thought that it would be great to have you on the show.
Absolutely.
So welcome. I appreciate it. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad that you're close to that we can actually be in person.
Yes.
We could have done video, but it's so nice to connect with you in person as well.
Absolutely.
I know,
Absolutely.
I
I
love
was so excited this morning. I'm like, yay, I get to see Vicki today. So,
And we get to do this today. So
yes,
yay.
yes, absolutely. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you very much. So a lot of people probably already know you, but if you could please just introduce yourself and just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Let's see. It's all started when I was 3.
Yeah. It goes way back when.
Oh, just kidding. So I have been doing digital consulting for over 14 years, which is just crazy. Like we were just talking earlier, like this stuff has just changed so much since then. And I always love sharing my story of, 14 years ago, people were telling me, these quote unquote business leaders and business coaches took my business plan to them. And all 3 of them said, that's not a business. You can't build that. That's a fad. And so I'm so grateful that I did not pay attention to them and did it anyway, or because I wouldn't be where I am today. And I love problem solving. So at the end of the day, that's what it's about for me, and helping clients achieve whatever goals that they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And I think you're very good at it too. And I think your clients would agree.
Oh.
And actually one of the things that's the topic of today's podcast is about the psychology of marketing and sales. So even though neither one of us are psychologists, we've both been in the business long enough that we understand the psychology behind marketing and sales and what it takes to actually make the 2 of those not only work independently, but also work together in synergy.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And so let's go ahead and kick it off. And let's just talk about how, since we've been kind of through the onset of digital marketing kind of taken off, and like we've both been in sales, let's talk about how marketing and sales has changed over the last 9 or 10 years.
Oh, goodness. It's so funny because it has changed a lot, but then at the same time, it's also very similar. And so I think the biggest thing is just technology. From a marketing standpoint, 10 years ago, we only had 150 channels.
Yeah.
Marketing tools, right?
Yeah. Seemed like a lot at the time.
Yeah, at the time, which is manageable now, right? We're like, hey, I can handle 150.
That's every day.
And that was 10 years ago, all the marketing tools that we're expected to understand. And now we're at approaching 7,000 tools.
Yeah.
And now we have tools that manage tools. Like this is getting out of control.
Exactly. We've got tools now that manage people's processes, and we've got the data behind it, like artificial intelligence is actually starting to do some of that for us. So we've come a long way since then. But it becomes overwhelming.
Very.
Exactly.
And then so that's from marketing, and then from sales, it has not evolved as much as I wish it would. And 10 years ago was a lot of cold calling, and I feel like we're still stuck in that mode of operation, and there's a much, much better way to do it. And it's a little bit of, why are we still doing that?
Yeah.
And it's because that's how it's always been done, Kendra.
The worst statement ever is that's the way we've always done. That is a phrase that just absolutely just stops me in my tracks. Just like,
yes,
why? I always challenge that.
Me too.
Help me understand why you always do this, and like, why is it working so well for you that you continue to think that you need to do it this way? Why not change?
Exactly. Yeah. I always say I pull the Dr. Phil. How's that working for you?
Yeah. See, doctor, psychology.
there you
See, we're
go.
pulling it all together here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I would agree. I've actually had clients who are just like, do more cold calling, do some cold calling. Or when I work at companies, they're like, we need to be doing a lot of cold calling. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many other options from a marketing perspective that can actually help drive the phone calls in. So more the inbound type marketing instead of the cold calling. Because it's how many people actually pick up the phone if they don't know who that person is that's calling them.
I know I don't. Because I get so many spam calls.
Yeah, I see
like a lot of
I don't know that number
and
decline. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that, from a psychology standpoint of sales and marketing, the biggest thing that I see as an issue in organizations today is they lack just the culture of sales and marketing, right? So what happens is, and you know this as well, it's finger pointing. It's like, well, that's sales' fault. That's marketing's fault. It's if, a lot of finger pointing. And when I do a lot of speaking, and I was with an organization, they were all company meeting recently, and we were talking about that. And I asked everyone in the, the audience is like, okay, raise your hand if you're in sales. And of course I knew there were people in there that are not from sales, right? It's all the company. And I'm like, wrong answer. Wrong answer, right? Everyone's in sales and everyone's in marketing. You have to have a culture that lives and breathes in the sales and marketing culture. It's not, you can't point to the marketing department and say that's marketing.
Right.
And that's the thing that I see a lot from a psychology standpoint of, just pulling to everyone together and that we're all working towards the same goal.
Yes.
Instead of competing with each other. And you and I both, came from those backgrounds of being in sales and being in marketing and seeing that.
And just understanding that there's a common goal that they need to be working towards. And I agree. I think that that's where a lot of the problems reside, is that there's not that upfront communication on here's the goal. And it's one thing to say it and it's different to do it. But when you have a common goal, if you just think about it, if everybody's aiming towards the same thing and everyone's in agreement on what that is, then all those strategies and tactics and accountability can happen underneath that. And if everybody's working in that direction, then that almost eliminates the finger pointing because you've already agreed on all those different layers. And hey, you said you're going to do this. So it kind of makes it easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also ask the question of, how often does sales and marketing meet?
Yes.
Right? Like they should be meeting
together. We're supposed to be meeting. That's the first thing you should be doing, is just staying in contact and being in alignment with what each other's doing. Yes, I agree. Yeah. What's the biggest response that you get from companies when you ask why are you still cold calling?
It's
besides this is the way we've always done it.
Right. Besides that, the other is, well, I don't have time for social media. That's the biggest thing that I hear from sales teams or just companies. I don't have time for social media.
Like, help me connect those dots.
Yeah, exactly. I love that your podcast is connecting dots.
Yes,
I love
exactly.
it. It's so perfect. So perfect. And it's just one of those things where I don't have time for it. And it's about working smart instead of working hard. Yeah. Right. Like in my early days in sales, I literally would be dropped off in an industrial park and I was just told, go door to door. How effective do you think that is?
Yeah, exactly.
And no joke. See, this was 2 months ago. I was in the lobby of a manufacturing company waiting for an appointment. And I saw a sales rep stop in, hand over his brochures to the front desk. And this was just a couple of months ago. Oh, and so after he left, I walked up to the lady at the front and I said, did I just see what I think I saw? She's like, well, what do you think you saw? And I said, did a salesperson just literally cold drop in here and drop off brochures? She goes, it happens 6 times a day, every day.
Seriously?
And this was just a couple of months ago. Oh, what year is it, people?
Stop doing that. Just imagine how much money the companies are investing in those employees to actually not only, because I'm sure there's some type of either car reimbursement or mileage reimbursement, the time that they're out on the road that they could be doing something else. So the opportunity cost, the cost of actually using the car, the mileage, all of the expenses associated with that, with not getting anything in return. And like you said, there's so many other smarter ways to actually make that happen.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah, so you do have time for social media. It's way, way more effective. And at the end of the day, it's about relationships. The other thing I see with sales teams is just the sales reluctancy, right?
Mhm.
They just are very reluctant to pick up the phone or reluctant to put themselves out there in social media, either through photos or videos or telling their story or writing a blog and putting themselves out there. That whole sales reluctancy from a psychology standpoint is a really, really big deal. And so when I'm working with organizations, I explain to them that stop calling it sales. Like if the word
Yes.
sales is tripping you up, then remove it.
Exactly.
Call it something else.
Yes.
Call it an education meeting, an empowerment meeting, a training.
Engagement.
Yeah, anything.
Advising. I mean, there's all kinds of other positive words. And I think that there's been a lot of negative association with the concept of sales.
Yes.
And that needs to be removed because it's no longer the old mentality. I think when people hear sales, they think of like that old used car salesman that's like, you know, greasy and just trying to like pull one over on you.
What do I gotta do today to get you in this car?
Oh my gosh, we gotta keep that
for sure.
So yeah, I completely, it's just right there with that mentality of, you know, what are they trying to pull over on me? And sales today is so far beyond that concept that I think people need to kind of get out of their own heads and just say, if someone's in sales, they're there because they have an option. They have a potential solution for you, and you just need to consider it. They're not there to say you have to do it. It's not a do or die, you know, time to actually make a decision, but it's an option. Consider it. Yeah. And yeah, the title, I think
it does.
And
it's just, you know, call it a relationship meeting, just anything. And it really should be about relationships. I've always said, I've never sold anyone in my whole entire life, but I've educated thousands and thousands of people.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we have to look at it from that. We have to look at it from that perspective about building relationships and being just naturally curious about people. Like everyone has a story. So I'm always very interested in hearing that and really understanding what business problems that they're trying to solve. Because back to like, I love problem solving. And so for me, that's the exciting piece of it. And looking at it that, you know, perspective will help them overcome what they're trying to achieve. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's probably, and you just said it, solving a particular problem. And I think, and part of the psychology of sales is understanding how you can find out what the problem actually is. Because a lot of times, as we know, we can read all kinds of articles. Salespeople traditionally will feature sell.
Yes, exactly.
Even if they benefit sell, they're still not, they're benefit selling to what?
Right.
And why?
Agreed.
So I think a lot of that is like digging down and just having, there's a lot of homework that goes into, even if you're cold calling, a lot of homework that goes into having a conversation.
Yes.
And I mean, you can access pretty much everything online. So why not do that? You know, if you're not going to do your due diligence ahead of time, then you're already showing that prospect or potential customer that you're not willing to put in the time to actually earn their business. So why should they do business with you?
Completely agree. And it's the same thing that I get so frustrated with on LinkedIn is, you know, I accept a connection request and immediately I'm pitched by somebody.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's just lazy, right?
Yeah.
You know, they didn't do their homework. They didn't, you know, there's gobs of, you know, articles and different things I'm involved in. You could have said, hey, I really enjoyed that article, whether you read it or not.
Yeah.
Right. I would respond to, yeah, I'll do a call with you. And, you know, cause I'm always willing to give up 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's just, people that are just jumping in there and immediately pitching and using social media in a wrong way.
Yeah.
And I always equate that to, it's like showing up to a Starbucks, complete stranger, walking up to them like, hey, will you marry me?
Yeah.
Right. Like, wait a minute. Where's the dating and courting aspect? Where's the getting to know me aspect? And I don't understand that because we do that naturally when we're together at a Starbucks, like, you know, face to face. But for some reason, and I'd love to find the psychology around this, is when we go online, we become a robot. Like we forget the relationship thing. And it's so easy. It's just a couple of minutes to do a little bit of research and
Yeah.
understand or leverage that mutual connection. So like I haven't made a cold call since 2005 because of LinkedIn. I will always find someone to sponsor me or champion me into an organization. And it's always because I feel so passionate about helping other businesses that, that's my drive. My drive isn't trying to sell someone something.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely been times where I've said, you know what, Mr. or Miss potential client, you're not a good fit right now. You're not ready for what we're trying to achieve, and willing to walk away because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of due diligence that needs to go in on the marketing side as well.
Agreed.
Yeah. So before you can sell, and that goes into why those two need to be working together constantly, not just setting the goals or setting, here's what we're working towards, but also coming up with a plan on when we're going to meet.
Yes.
What are we meeting about at the leader level?
Yes.
And then at the individual contributor level or individual employee level, you need to have like a partner almost. So a marketing person should have a partner on sales so that those two can at least collaborate and work together and make sure that the needs are being met and uncover what's not being met. The salespeople or engagement professionals, advisors, whatever new name we're going to assign them, they are the ones who are interacting with the prospects. So they're having those face-to-face or direct conversations, so they know what type of feedback or pushback that they're going to get. Marketing doesn't have the luxury of those conversations.
Yeah.
So marketing's got one piece of the puzzle or one piece of the solution. Sales has got the other one. So how can you be successful if you don't have those two working together? Yeah. You're making it harder on yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. So how do you see marketing fitting in more with sales, like those two working together?
Yeah, I think, we have to look at, from a marketing standpoint, as human beings, we're just creature of habit.
Yes.
Right. And so I love the Power of Habit book. If you haven't read that, definitely check it out. Power of Habit. It's very scary how programmable we are. 40% of what we do is just out of habit. Like it's just our subconscious just doing what we're doing just because it's out of habit. And so really thinking about, from a marketing standpoint, what are things that we can play into from that consistency standpoint, and how we even feel when we see a disconnect in a brand, right? I know, like, if I see a particular logo or sign, and this actually, I saw this recently and I almost took a picture and I'm like, nope, I'm not going to do it because I never ever want to cause harm to anyone. But they had their logo outside of their company, and then a billboard that I saw like a mile or so down the way, completely different, can be different colors. And then even out of curiosity, I couldn't help it. I went to their website, and then that was completely different.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And so, my emotion to that was, whoa, if they're disconnected from a marketing standpoint, how disconnected is their business?
Yes.
Right. Like, I think a lot of us jump to conclusions, and, 52% of people will actually dismiss a business just by looking at, their website.
Yeah.
And if it's not very clear, who they are and who they serve and what problems they can solve, because the majority of websites that we look at today, and when we're building out websites, when we first start working with someone, is the whole website is about the company. You're like, okay, wait a minute, time out.
No, what problem are you solving?
Exactly.
Why should people
and
even go farther?
writing to that target audience, right? We're writing to the language they're using. And so allowing marketing to, because sometimes salespeople are super protective of their clients.
Yes.
And allowing marketing to have those focus group meetings. How does the client describe what you do? How does the client see what you brought to the table? Because sometimes you're going to uncover the underneath things that really wasn't the reason why they selected you as an organization over someone else.
Right.
And so I really think it's just digging into those routines and habits. And as you know, from a marketing standpoint, organic's dead.
Yeah.
It has been for several years. And we still see a lot of that where we'll just do organic social media, and that's, checking a box in marketing.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's fine for credibility and brand awareness, but it's not going to convert.
Yeah.
And so making sure that people understand from that marketing aspect that, there's that conversion piece that they need from a lead generation.
Mhm.
And I love that at Inbound last year, they really talked about the flywheel instead of the funnel.
Yes.
Goes back to being humans.
Yes.
And the psychology of it. We're
Yeah.
not linear thinkers.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Sometimes we make very irrational and impulse decisions.
Yes.
Right? We're not
We're
linear
multi-passionate.
thinkers. Very, very. And so being able to surround ourselves and really look at a 360-degree of who we're really working with and how are we coming alongside of them versus trying to shove them through a funnel, because those days are gone too.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of getting outside of don't think, like from a sales perspective, don't think with your objective in mind. Like I'm going to meet with this prospect because I need to make a sale.
Yes.
Or I need to call this prospect because I need to make a check mark in that box of how many calls I made today. It's about getting out of your own way.
Yes.
And just focusing on the prospect. And the more questions that you can ask and listen, don't be trying to figure out what your next question is.
Yes.
Yeah. It's just like, think of what they're saying, listen, and that's the best way to come up with your next set of questions. So just kind of get out of your own way. Don't think about your objective. If you focus on the customer, you'll meet your objective.
Right.
Just naturally.
Right. Yeah. And knowing that getting to the no is a good thing.
It's a decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah. I'm all right with that. That just it gets me one step closer to where I need to be.
Exactly. And that takes one more person out of the maybe.
Yes.
And it just creates clarity.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I think too, from marketing and sales, it's about being authentic.
Can I get an amen on that?
Yeah. Amen. Lifting the roof and a little A.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's, I think both for marketing and sales. And again, if it goes back to them meeting and just partnering up and understanding what each one is doing, and then just being not just a salesperson being authentic or a marketing person being authentic on social media. It's about just, why can't we just be ourselves?
Right.
I mean, that's a lot easier.
Yes. Yes.
Why can't we be ourselves?
Right.
I mean,
absolutely.
It's a good question to ask because everybody's talking about being authentic. And I mean, that was just like, well, why aren't you being anyway?
Right. Right. Because eventually, they're going to get to know you at some level, and how you show up online is how you should show up offline as well. Right.
Yes.
We don't want that disconnect. And people are drawn to that authenticity. And that's why, we're huge proponents of, video, because you and I could sit and write a blog post about this, but you wouldn't get the opportunity to hear the passion in our voice,
right,
or see us on video, talk about, our passion about this. And you're drawn in, because our brains process video and photo 60,000 times more than text. And we're not in green screen production studio overly produced, because that's not what we want. Again, as human beings, we want that. The very fundamental basis as human beings, we just want to be known, seen, and heard. And so if our sales and marketing to understand how are we seeing and hearing and knowing our clients, you will be 1,000 times more successful than where you are today.
Right. And that's just understanding human behavior,
yes,
which is what the psychology
agreed
is. So really it's the psychology of business. Marketing and sales is pretty much the two key points of making any business operate.
Absolutely.
Make it successful.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Then there's also the whole thing of reverse psychology. So this can be both from a marketing and sales perspective. So from a sales perspective, it could be seen different ways. But I think regardless if you're marketing or sales, that it's all about giving.
Yes.
So again, take the whole objective out of the picture. If you just focus on giving information, giving something of value, just giving something educational, don't worry about it. They're going to see you as somebody that is an expert in your area. They're going to see you as a go-to person. They're going to see you as a thought, whatever your terminology is or whatever you want to be perceived as. If you're doing those things, then those prospects or those companies or those businesses will want to reach out to you because you're becoming that person.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it.
And I think you do that naturally.
Oh, thank you.
In general.
Thank
Whether
you.
you're online or whether you're like in person, because that's one of the things I think that draws people to you is your personality is very much like a very giving in a natural way. And I think that's why people want to do business with you, because you are that way.
Aww.
I've noticed that from
Can
day one.
we have a group hug? I love this. Thank you.
Group
Yeah. No, I've always been very passionate about, I didn't get here by myself.
Mhm.
Right. And so it's my job to turn around and to give back. And,
Yeah.
and I just, it breaks my heart when I see people, struggling, and I'm like, all right, we're going to figure this out together. Let's lock arms. Right. Like that's the way my mentality is.
Yeah.
That's what we all should be doing. And wouldn't we be in such a better place in the world, instead of this whole, self-centered things that are happening that we see out there.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the LinkedIn example that you
Yeah.
had mentioned too, that when you accept a LinkedIn request and the first thing that somebody does is send you a message of,
Mhm.
hey, here's my product.
Ugh, stop it.
I seriously disconnect from them.
Yes.
Like, there are no second chances. I'm like, I don't have time for this.
Mhm.
And if that's your intent, don't
Mhm.
send me a request.
Agreed.
I don't want any part of it.
Mhm.
So we talked separately a little bit, but then also about togetherness, the key to joining forces, and just the importance of these two obviously being seen separately, but
Mhm.
also more importantly, these two meaning marketing and sales,
Yes.
sales being seen together.
Yes.
What do you think is what you're seeing with businesses now? Some obviously still see them separately, but then do you see more businesses that are actually joining forces from a marketing and sales perspective, that they're starting to combine more often internally? Do you see that happening?
Yeah, we're slowly getting there. I wish I could say, that we've arrived. We haven't. We still got a long way to go.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still having conversations. Just last week, I had a conversation. 2 companies are, rolling out. They're super excited because they're rolling out their website.
Yeah.
And I said, that's great. I'm excited for you, but how are you going to drive traffic? And what does the marketing conversation look like? And what does the differentiation look like? And what's your video strategy? Of course, I turn in and ask 1,000 questions, and I get really annoying. But my questions come out of because of I want them to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get a whole lot of, well, we really didn't plan beyond the website. And, and the whole days of build it and they will come are long gone.
Exactly.
And no joke, I just had those exact 2 conversations last week.
Mm-hmm.
And
last week?
Yeah, last week.
2019.
Yes. Yeah, just last week.
What?
And so we're just, we're still not there. And many years ago, like, through this whole process, I was kind of getting frustrated, with clients. I'm like, why aren't they fired up like I am? And what I really had to remind myself is, like, this is a whole different language.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did is said, how would I feel if someone set me down in front of a computer and said, all right, you're going to learn Chinese today?
Mm-hmm.
I would feel very overwhelmed, very overwhelmed. And immediately it would, my mindset would be, well, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't know. Like, I would just be super overwhelmed. And so to remind myself, that's where our clients are.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to understand and not use so much marketing and sales language.
Yeah. And
use language that would be, helpful to them.
And I think that's something that you do really well too, is that because you know both sides of the equation, so you know the marketing, the sales, that you're able to have those intelligent conversations with companies. And if you've got marketing and sales in the room together, then you can kind of manage those conversations and help each other understand the other one, and probably brings them closer together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that is key too, is just knowing the lingo and understanding how each one talks. And it sounds silly. And every time I think about it, I wrote a blog post on it at one point too, and it just seems so like trivial. But then if you think about it, you just made a great point, is that if they don't understand it, we kind of sometimes take it for granted that they do. And sometimes we have to take a step back and say, okay, I know that maybe we know this, but let's simplify it. Let's take a couple steps back and start from scratch.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because then everybody's going to be on the same page and you're all going to move together at the same pace. Yeah. Are you noticing anything in particular, like when they do start coming together, is there anything in particular that's helping them understand how they can move forward? Like, is it creating personas, or is it creating certain marketing materials, or is it creating a social media strategy? Like, are you seeing anything like that that's helping with that transition and having those two teams come together?
Yeah. So D, all the above. So I love
Yeah,
that. I love that. I mean, I think the biggest thing is, the meetings where they're meeting together, I think is, just step one, right? Meeting and understanding that they all have the same goal. Because there's so many marketing teams that are, frustrated because they're producing all this content and they're begging sales to share it and to use it. And sales like, I'm not using that's crap. And so, let's all get in the same room and on the same page so everybody can be successful. So starting there, and then sharing successes is the other one. So I always encourage teams, like, when there is a win because of a lead generation program or a conversation or a differentiation or, or social media, whatever aspects of it, that both sides are sharing their successes. So sales can say, wow, I didn't cold call. I used LinkedIn. I got a meeting. I landed this business. Thank you, marketing. And marketing needs to lead the charge on educating, right? Because what I see a lot in companies is they push and tell sales to share content, but they never stop to give them the why.
True. Yes.
So marketing has to start leading the charge and educating. And I mean, educating the whole organization, not just sales, the whole organization, and explaining why they're doing what they're doing from a marketing perspective, why they're involved in social media, what are their goals, and how they can participate.
Yes.
And that really, I think, is really bridging that gap and really getting them towards that sales and marketing culture.
Yeah.
And I have seen that work really well
Awesome.
in getting teams meeting and then also doing the education piece.
Yeah. And that is huge. Yeah. I would say an amen on
that.
Can we get an amen on that?
I love it. We're preaching today.
We are. We may be in a realtor's office, but we are preaching. So let's see here. So I had here like all caps and exclamation points is the key is communication. It really is, not just among the teams, but I mean, really internally too. And I think to be successful externally to prospects, whether it's us as marketing and salespeople or entrepreneurs, or as business owners where you have a big company, you need to have agreement internally on messaging and education and who's doing what, accountability. And once you have that internally, then it makes it easier to portray that or get that externally. Like you were saying with the example of the billboard and the website, all of that is all completely disconnected. I bet there was no communication internally with that particular company on here's what we need to do. And there wasn't a plan on how we're going to transition because maybe they were going through rebranding, but even then you shouldn't have that kind of disconnect in those three different places and who knows wherever else.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and now where we are, there's a lot of organizations, they don't have big marketing teams, or they have one marketing person or a part-time marketing person because everyone wears multiple hats.
Yeah.
And what happens, and this is probably what happened with this organization that I saw when I drove by, is they have multiple marketing vendors, right? So they'll have a web vendor, a design vendor, a content vendor, an SEO vendor, a branding vendor. And then when I asked them, I said, well, how often do you guys all meet together? And I get, deer in the headlights look of, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, why? All of those people need to be in the same room.
Yeah.
And businesses don't have time to manage 7 vendors, nor do they know how to vet 7 vendors because they don't even know enough.
Yeah.
Right. So, get those people in a room, get them talking, get them knowing each other. I mean, we do that a lot because we collaborate with other organizations all the time because, we're about just a piece of pie. We don't need the whole pie.
Yeah.
And we do that on a regular basis. And we actually lead those efforts sometimes when we see it not happening.
Yeah.
We say, you know what? We're going to step in and we need this to happen because back to my goal is always making sure that client's successful in whatever they're trying to achieve.
Right. When you said that, it made me think of like telephone, where you like tell someone in the ear and you start with one message.
Yes.
And then you kind of go around the table and it ends up being a completely different message. And that's what happens when you have different people and they're not all together hearing the same thing.
Agreed.
So it needs to be the same thing. And if they're not, then that's where all the problems come into play if you're going to be using different vendors. So I would agree that would need to be on point. Have you been working with any companies where they have their marketing and sales teams already aligned and successes that you've seen with what they're doing? Like what made them successful?
I think, you know, once the organization did, you know, the training and got them understanding the why and the how, and then being able to turn back and tell those success stories, it's like, you know, the Roger Bannister moment. You know, he was the first person that ever broke the 4-minute mile. And I use him on a regular basis. He's the first person that broke the 4-minute mile. For ever and ever and ever, they said it's not humanly possible to break the 4-minute mile. But then Roger Bannister did it.
Yeah.
And so what happened, within a month of that, 7 other people also broke it.
It was like they just needed to hear.
They needed to see it. They
Yeah.
needed to know it could be done. They needed to experience it. So once they experience it and see, oh, they can do that. Oh, sales can win business using marketing support. Sales can, you know, get out in front of clients and not do it in a cold way and shorten up the sales cycle. Oh, wow. When we start doing this together, like, so once they see it, then and tell those stories, right? Because they need to have their Roger Bannister moment. They need to see it can be done.
Yeah.
And so once that happens, everything just starts. Because then what happens, you know, with the sales teams especially, you always have the bell curve, right? You always have the early adopters and the late adopters, and the people in the middle. And so what happens when they start seeing the successes, the late adopters start saying, ooh, I better get on this bandwagon, right? Like, because this train is moving, and I'm not on the train.
And it's been out there long enough, so I guess it's time I get on board.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. I would agree that there are some of those companies that are doing really well. And I think once they see the synergies happening internally, then they can actually make it better for the company overall. And I think you hit on too is just lessening the sales cycle.
Yes.
And if you can do that, I mean, from a company perspective, you got to think revenue goals. And then you're going to hit them faster. So
absolutely.
To me, it just makes sense to have those two, but I think maybe to you and I, because we know both sides of marketing and sales, and that's such a critical piece of like the entire puzzle, that those two have to be working together. So I'm glad to hear you saying that.
Absolutely.
We're saying the same thing.
Yes.
And that's a great point on the Roger Bannister. Is that his last?
Yeah.
Okay. I'd heard that before, but I completely forgot about that. And that's like complete psychology.
It is. Yeah.
So yeah, it was completely possible even before he did it, but he was just like, oh, we'll make this happen. That's interesting that 7 people after that made it happen.
Right. Because they could see it.
Yeah.
And that, you know, and that's across all aspects of our life, right? We can't achieve it until we see it.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the key points that just like, if we were going to kind of wrap this all up, then, you know, 3 takeaways that we would have from this conversation is one of those is getting out of your own comfort zone.
Yes.
And I think that was a great example of that. And just saying you have to stop doing what you're doing today, but figure out what it is that you are doing that's keeping you from moving forward. And please never say, this is the way that we've always done it.
Yes.
Stop it. Stop it right now. So just getting out of your own comfort zone and then to try new things. And I think we all, and you had mentioned this earlier before we started doing the podcast, about just kind of getting out of your own comfort zone and trying new things.
Yes.
Testing and testing and testing. And you're never going to know what works and what doesn't until you actually do. And I think, and you said a lot of people, if not all of us, are in that in some way or another at some point in our life. And the best thing that you can do is just to do it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just press go.
Yes.
Go. And then the third takeaway would be just always be reading and educating ourselves. Just always be learning something. And that's the best way you can actually move forward. Because without knowing what's going on, what other people are doing, then how are you going to stay on top of what's going on? So just always be learning something. Be a lifelong student.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. That is a beautiful bow you just put right on there. That was
right
perfect.
Awesome. Great. All right. Well, do you have anything else that you want to share or say before we sign off?
No, thank you so much this was so fun.
I know, it
so
really
fun.
was.
So fun.
Again, I appreciate you being here. And before we go, I've seen other podcasters or people like Lewis Howes and Marie Forleo. Different people do this and I absolutely love it. So I want to do it as well.
Okay. Yeah.
And just say 3 things that I appreciate about you.
Aww.
And just say that I want to recognize you for being authentic. I know I mentioned that earlier, and just you are always the same person. Like, no matter if I see you in a personal setting, if I see you in a professional setting, if you're doing a speaking engagement, or if we're sitting here just the two of us goofing off before we start the video, I mean, you are always the same person. So I love the fact that you are always showing up as your authentic self. So I wanted to thank you for that. And then you are a take action kind of person. Like, I love that. I envy you about that. I mean, you just like set your mind to it and you just go.
Yeah.
And I so appreciate that about you. So I think you are like a go-to and the epitome of take action. So I wanted to say thank you for that too. And then just your creativity, not from like we're comparing our handwriting, which is not good. But
Yeah, exactly.
like from a creative thinking and a creative problem solving mindset. You've got such a way of really digging into finding out what problems are and then coming up with solutions, and not always thinking the same way. Like, every single situation is going to be different because you look at every single situation differently. So I appreciate that, and I always have admired that about you. So I wanted to thank you very much for those three things, and just always showing up and being yourself.
Wow,
So-
thank you. Thank you. That's so special to me. Thank you.
Aw,
I think you just did a branding exercise for me.
Oh,
I love it.
yay!
I love it.
We got another thing going here.
Yes.
Well, thank you again very much. And I appreciate you making the trip up here. And
My
it was
pleasure.
awesome doing this in person. I'm so
Yes.
glad that you live close enough that
Yes,
you
me
could do
too.
this.
Me
Yes,
too.
very exciting. And I want to say thank you real quick to John Glista, who is the realtor that I use here at Iron Gate Realty. He is great. I've known him for years. He's been my realtor. I know I may be saying that wrong, but he is an awesome person to work with, and he was very open to me using their conference room today, which is where I am today, is the Iron Gate Realty office in Springboro, Ohio. So I want to give him and his office a huge shout out and say thank you very much for allowing us to use your facility, and I greatly appreciate it. So with that, I'll go ahead and say make today great. And until next time, I'm Vicki O'Neill, the host of Connect the Dots podcast. Thanks. Thank you again for joining me on episode 9 of the Connect the Dots podcast. Another special thank you to Kendra Ramirez for joining me and talking about the psychology of marketing and sales. You can also access the show notes by going to my website at vickyoneil.com/podcast and clicking on the episode 9 link.